The courtroom was packed, buzzing with tension. Rows of spectators whispered among themselves, reporters hunched over their notepads, and the distant echo of a judge's gavel in another chamber punctuated the air. This wasn't just another trial, it was a case that had gripped the city, a high-profile armed robbery with assault charges. At the bench, Judge Rebecca Carter maintained a composed expression, though the weight of the morning's case docket pressed on her. She had presided over countless trials, each one blending into the next, a cycle of crime, defense, and judgment. She was used to it. Unmoved. Or at least, she thought she was. The bailiff's voice rang out. Case number 2401, the State of Louisiana vs. Daniel Harris. Rebecca shifted slightly, her fingers tapping absently on the polished wood of the bench. She glanced down at the case file. Armed robbery. Aggravated assault. Resisting arrest. Another lost cause, another man who had fallen through the cracks. She sighed inwardly, steeling herself for yet another predictable proceeding. Then the defendant was led into the courtroom. Rebecca's world tilted. The man standing before her, shackled at the wrists and ankles, wasn't just another defendant. It was Daniel Harris. Her Daniel. Her throat tightened, and her pulse pounded in her ears. She felt like she had been punched in the gut. Daniel. The boy she had once known better than anyone. The boy who had been her best friend, her confidant, the one person who understood her in ways no one else ever had. But this man before her was no longer that boy. His face was lined with exhaustion, his once bright eyes now clouded with something she couldn't quite place. His shoulders sagged under the weight of years of struggle, yet there was still something unmistakable about him. If this gripping opening hooked you, let us know. Comment 1 if you're invested in this story, 0 if it's not your thing. Or just hit subscribe to RVM, Black Struggles if you want more powerful narratives like this. The tension in the room was suffocating. The crowd leaned in, waiting to see how the judge, how Rebecca Carter, would react. Would she follow the law, or would the past cloud her judgment? What would you do in her shoes? If you love thought-provoking stories like this, give this video a like, share it with a friend, and don't forget to subscribe to RVM, Black Struggles for more deep and powerful content. One case. One verdict. One decision that could change everything. And you don't want to miss what happens next. Stay with us. Hit subscribe, and let's keep the conversation going. Recognition flickered across Daniel's face, but just as quickly, he looked away. Rebecca's grip on her gavel faltered. The courtroom, the people, the noise, it all blurred, as if she had been sucked into a vacuum. Her mind raced back to the endless summer days of their childhood, their secret hideouts near the creek, the whispered conversations about escaping their small town, the unspoken bond that had carried them through the harsh reality of life in Hammond, Louisiana. But those memories were ghosts now. Here, in this moment, there was no creek. No laughter. No shared dreams of a better life. There was only the stark, inescapable truth: she was the judge, and he was the accused. Rebecca forced her voice steady. Mr. Harris, you stand accused of armed robbery and aggravated assault. How do you plead? Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Then, Daniel lifted his head, his voice hoarse yet firm. Not guilty, Your Honor. The words sent a jolt through Rebecca. She wanted to stop the trial right then. Wanted to demand answers. What had happened to him? How had their lives taken such drastically different paths? But she couldn't. She was bound by the robe she wore, the position she held. The past was gone. The trial had begun. And whatever happened next, it would change everything. The courtroom buzzed with tension, but Judge Rebecca Carter barely heard it. She was still grappling with the impossible truth. Daniel Harris, her childhood best friend, was standing before her in shackles, accused of a crime she couldn't believe he had committed. Her heart pounded, her grip tightening around the gavel. She had always prided herself on her ability to separate personal emotions from the law. But this was different. As the prosecutor began laying out the charges, Rebecca's mind drifted, back to a time when Daniel wasn't an accused criminal, but a boy full of dreams and fire. Hammond, Louisiana, 20 years ago. They met on a scorching summer afternoon, at a small creek hidden behind a field of wild grass. She had wandered too far from her backyard, chasing the sound of rushing water, when she spotted a boy, tall, dark-skinned, with sharp, intelligent eyes, untangling a fishing line caught in the reeds. Need help? She had asked, stepping closer. Daniel had looked up, wary. White girls didn't talk to boys like him in Hammond. Not in 1995. Not when invisible lines had been drawn across their town, separating rich from poor, black from white. But Rebecca hadn't cared about those things. And Daniel, after a moment of hesitation, had handed her the tangled line. That was the beginning. They became inseparable, meeting at the creek after school, exploring the town's forgotten corners, trading dreams beneath the magnolia trees in her backyard. "Do you ever think about leaving this place?" Daniel had asked one night, lying beside her on the cool grass, staring up at the stars. Rebecca had laughed. "Leave Hammond? Where would we go?" Daniel's voice was quiet but firm. "Somewhere better. Somewhere we don't have to sneak around just to be friends." At the time, Rebecca had shrugged it off, but Daniel had meant every word. Even as a kid, he knew the world had already made up its mind about him. And then, the moment everything fell apart. The summer that changed everything. They were 14 when her father caught them sitting together on her front porch. Inside. "Now," he had ordered, his voice cold as steel. Rebecca had hesitated, looking at Daniel, silently pleading for him to say something, anything. But Daniel had just nodded. "Go on," he had murmured. "I'll see you around." He lied. They never saw each other again. The next week, Daniel's family packed up and left town. No one knew why. No one even questioned it. And Rebecca? She buried the memories. She buried him. She threw herself into her studies, into law school, into a future where the past didn't matter. Until now. Until today. Back in the courtroom, the present. "Your Honor?" Rebecca blinked, dragged back into reality. The prosecutor was looking at her expectantly. She straightened in her chair, gripping the edges of the bench. "Proceed," she ordered, her voice steady. But inside, she was unraveling. Daniel Harris wasn't just a defendant. He was the boy who once made her believe in dreams. And now, she had to decide if he would walk free, or spend the rest of his life behind bars. The courtroom settled into a tense rhythm as Prosecutor Richard Powell rose from his seat. He adjusted his tie, his movements calculated, oozing confidence. He had built his career on airtight cases, and today was no different. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Powell began, pacing deliberately. "The evidence will show that the defendant, Daniel Harris, is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. The security footage, the witness testimony, and the swift response of law enforcement all point to one undeniable truth: this man is a criminal." Rebecca kept her expression neutral, but her stomach twisted. Criminal. The word echoed in her mind, clashing against every childhood memory she had of Daniel. She turned her gaze to the defense table. Daniel sat still, hands clasped in front of him, his posture tight but controlled. He wasn't fidgeting. He wasn't shifting uncomfortably in his seat like most guilty defendants did. He was just watching. Waiting. And that's what worried her the most. A case that doesn't add up. The prosecutor called his first witness, the store clerk from the convenience store where the robbery had taken place. "Mr. Chambers," Powell said, his voice smooth. "You were working the night of the incident, correct?" The witness, a wiry man in his late 50s, nodded. "Yes, sir. I saw the whole thing." "Tell the court what you saw." The man straightened. "It was late, past midnight. I was behind the counter when a man came in wearing a red hoodie. At first, he just looked around, but then he got aggressive. Started yelling. Next thing I know, he's lunging over the counter, swinging at me. I tried to fight him off, but he was too strong. He grabbed the cash, then ran." Rebecca glanced at Daniel. Not a single muscle in his face moved. Powell walked toward the jury, emphasizing each word. "And you're certain this was the defendant?" The clerk hesitated. "Well, I mean, it was dark, and he had the hood up." But what?" Powell pushed. The clerk clicked his lips. "He looked like him." Rebecca's eyebrows lifted slightly. "He looked like him. Not it was him." Defense attorney Emma Blake rose swiftly, her every movement exuding quiet determination. "Mr. Chambers," she began, stepping toward the witness stand, "you testified that the assailant wore a red hoodie. But when my client was arrested, was he wearing a red hoodie?" The store clerk blinked. No, I guess not." Emma nodded. "And you said it was dark, you didn't actually see the attacker's face clearly, did you?" The clerk shifted uncomfortably. "Not exactly." Rebecca didn't miss the flicker of doubt that passed across the jury's faces. "The questionable arrest." Emma continued her assault. "Let's talk about the arrest. Officer Travis, the lead officer in this case, stated that my client was found 2 blocks away from the crime scene. He was detained because he matched a vague description, a black male in dark clothing." She turned back to the jury. "No red hoodie. No stolen cash on him. Just his word against the system that has already decided he's guilty." Powell scoffed. "Are we supposed to ignore that he was near the crime scene? That he was arrested minutes after the robbery? Being near a crime scene doesn't make someone a criminal, Mr. Powell," Emma shot back. "And you still haven't answered one question, where is the red hoodie?" The courtroom fell silent. Rebecca felt the weight of the moment. The red hoodie, the key piece of evidence that supposedly identified Daniel, was missing. It should have been found in a dumpster, on the sidewalk, in an alley, somewhere. But it hadn't been. Which meant one of two things. Daniel had an accomplice who got rid of the hoodie before the police arrived. Daniel never wore a red hoodie in the first place. Rebecca's pulse quickened. If it was the second option, then Daniel was being set up. Daniel speaks, a fight against assumptions. After a brief recess, Emma made an unexpected move. She called Daniel himself to the stand. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs. Defendants rarely testified, it was a risky move. But Daniel didn't flinch as he stood, his shackles clinking softly as he took his place on the witness stand. "State your full name for the record," Emma said. "Daniel Harris." His voice was steady, but his eyes flickered, just for a second, to Rebecca. "Daniel, were you in that convenience store that night?" "No," he said firmly. "Were you wearing a red hoodie?" "No." "Then where were you?" Daniel exhaled. "Walking home. I had just left my friend Marcus's house. I took my usual route, same one I always take after a late night. I was 3 blocks away when I heard sirens. Next thing I know, I'm on the ground with my face in the pavement." Emma nodded. "Did the officers ask you any questions before they arrested you?" Daniel let out a bitter chuckle. "No. They just threw cuffs on me." Rebecca watched the jury carefully. Some of them were leaning forward now, absorbing every word. Then Emma delivered the final blow. "Daniel, do you have a criminal record?" "No." "Were you carrying any stolen money when the police arrested you?" "No." "Were your fingerprints found on the cash register?" "No." Emma turned to the jury. "Then tell me, where is the proof that my client committed this crime?" Silence. Rebecca's heart pounded. This wasn't just a weak case, this case had holes big enough to drive a truck through. The trial takes a dark turn. Powell scrambled to regain control. "Your Honor, we have security footage." Emma cut him off. "Footage so blurry it could be anyone." Powell's lips pressed into a thin line. "We also have Officer Travis, who arrested the defendant." Emma's voice sharpened. "Officer Travis, who has had multiple complaints filed against him for racial profiling." The jury shifted uncomfortably. And then, just as Rebecca thought the case couldn't take another turn, the doors at the back of the courtroom slammed open. A uniformed officer strode in, pale-faced, carrying a file. He approached Powell and handed it over. Powell's eyes widened as he scanned the contents. Rebecca narrowed her gaze. "Mr. Powell, is there something you'd like to share with the court?" Powell hesitated. For the first time, he looked uncertain. And that's when Rebecca knew, something had just shifted. Something big. And whatever it was, it could change everything. The tension in the courtroom was razor-sharp. All eyes were on Prosecutor Richard Powell, whose hands clutched the newly delivered file like it contained a ticking time bomb. His usually smug demeanor cracked, his brow furrowing as he scanned the pages. Rebecca Carter's judge instincts kicked in. Whatever was in that file, Powell hadn't expected it. "Mr. Powell," she said, her voice even but firm, "is there something you need to disclose to the court?" Powell hesitated, flipping through the papers, then cleared his throat. "Your Honor, I need a moment to review this new evidence." "A moment?" Rebecca arched an eyebrow. "This court doesn't operate on your convenience, Mr. Powell." "What's in that file?" Powell's jaw tightened. He knew he couldn't stall forever. Finally, with visible reluctance, he spoke. "It's an internal police report, detailing inconsistencies in the arresting officer's statement." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Rebecca felt her pulse quicken. "Inconsistencies?" She turned to Emma Blake, Daniel's defense attorney. "Ms. Blake, do you wish to review this document?" Emma didn't hesitate. "Absolutely, Your Honor." The bailiff retrieved the file and handed it over. Emma's eyes darted across the pages, and then, her fingers tightened around the paper. A slow, satisfied smile spread across her face. Rebecca leaned forward. "This was big. Your Honor," Emma said, her voice dripping with restrained fury. "The defense requests an immediate cross-examination of Officer Travis." Powell's head snapped up. "Objection. This is unexpected evidence, and we need time to..." Rebecca cut him off. "Overruled." Her eyes locked onto Powell. "Your witness is already on the prosecution's list, is he not?" Powell hesitated, then nodded stiffly. "Then there's no reason to delay," Rebecca said. She turned to the bailiff. "Bring in Officer Travis." A cop on the stand, a system on trial. The doors creaked open, and Officer Jack Travis strode in. He was a burly man in his early 40s, his uniform crisp, but sweat glistened on his brow. He had expected a routine testimony, but now, the game had changed. He took his seat at the witness stand, his expression stiff. Emma wasted no time. She held up the report. "Officer Travis, do you recognize this document?" Travis glanced at it, then cleared his throat. "Yes, ma'am. It states that your official report on Mr. Harris's arrest contains several contradictions. Would you care to explain that?" Travis's jaw tightened. "I don't know what you mean." Emma walked closer. "Let me refresh your memory. In your original statement, you claimed that you saw Daniel Harris fleeing the convenience store before apprehending him 2 blocks away. Correct?" Travis nodded. "That's right." Emma's voice sharpened. "But according to this new report, surveillance footage from the police car does not show Daniel Harris running from the store. In fact, the footage doesn't place him at the store at all." A wave of murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Rebecca felt a chill creep up her spine. This wasn't just a weak case. This was a fabrication. Travis shifted in his seat. I must have made a mistake in my written report." "A mistake?" Emma pressed, her voice rising. "You mean to tell this court that you falsely reported seeing Daniel Harris at the scene of the crime?" "I didn't," Travis started, but Emma cut him off. "You arrested a man with no evidence, no stolen money, and no connection to the crime, because he happened to be in the area?" Travis's face turned red. And then, Emma dropped the bombshell. "Or is it because you knew Daniel Harris from before?" The courtroom fell into stunned silence. Rebecca snapped her head up. "What?" Travis stiffened. I don't know him." Emma took a slow, deliberate step closer. "That's funny, Officer Travis, because Daniel Harris filed a complaint against you for excessive force 8 years ago." The air sucked out of the room. Daniel, who had remained silent through most of the trial, lifted his head sharply. His expression was unreadable, but something flashed in his eyes, something Rebecca recognized as old wounds reopening. Powell leapt to his feet. "Objection. This is irrelevant to the case." Emma turned to Rebecca. "Your Honor, this is directly relevant. Officer Travis had a prior conflict with my client. He arrested him without cause in the past, and now we're supposed to believe this was just a coincidence?" Rebecca could feel the shift in the room. The jury was no longer looking at Daniel like a suspect. They were looking at him like a man who had been hunted. She looked at Travis. His once confident posture had crumbled. He looked trapped. And that's when he made his fatal mistake. He glanced at Powell. It was quick. A flicker of panic. A silent plea. But Rebecca caught it. Her stomach sank. This wasn't just about Travis. Something bigger was at play. The case unravels, a darker truth. During recess, Rebecca retreated to her chambers. She ran a hand through her hair, breathing heavily. This wasn't just a wrongful arrest. This was a cover-up. A setup. And if she ruled against the prosecution, she knew, she wouldn't just be freeing Daniel Harris. She would be exposing something that powerful people wanted buried. A knock at the door startled her. It was Emma. She stepped inside, shutting the door behind her. "We have a problem," Emma said in a hushed voice. Rebecca exhaled. "Tell me something I don't know." Emma shook her head. "No, this is worse. I just got a call from a witness who was willing to testify about what really happened that night. But now..." She swallowed. "Now they're missing." Rebecca felt a chill crawl down her spine. Missing? This wasn't just about Daniel anymore. Someone was willing to make people disappear to keep this case quiet. And if they didn't figure out who was behind it soon, Daniel Harris might not be the only one fighting for his life. The atmosphere in the courthouse had shifted from tense to outright volatile. The jury wasn't just doubtful anymore. They were suspicious. The cracks in the case against Daniel Harris were spreading like a spiderweb, threatening to collapse everything the prosecution had built. But now, there was something far more dangerous at play. A key witness had vanished. Rebecca Carter sat in her chambers, staring at Emma Blake, who had just delivered the news in a hushed, urgent whisper. "A witness was supposed to testify?" Rebecca repeated, her voice tight. "And now they're missing?" Emma nodded, her face pale. "I just got the call. A gas station attendant who worked near the convenience store that night. He told me he saw something different from what's in the police report. He was ready to come forward, until this morning. His phone's disconnected. His landlord says he packed up and left in the middle of the night." Rebecca's stomach clenched. This wasn't just a weak case anymore. This was a cover-up. A knock at the door startled them both. Rebecca's assistant, Margaret, poked her head in, looking uneasy. "Judge Carter. There's a man outside who says he has information about the case. He refuses to give his name, But he says. You'll want to hear what he has to say. Rebecca and Emma exchanged a look. The walls were closing in. Bring him in, Rebecca said. Margaret hesitated. I don't think that's a good idea. He says he won't come inside. He told me to tell you, if you care about the truth, meet me at the parking garage in 5 minutes. Alone. A chill ran down Rebecca's spine. Emma's expression hardened. No way. That's a setup. You can't go alone. Rebecca clenched her jaw. She knew the risks, but her instincts screamed that this was important. Too important to ignore. She exhaled sharply and grabbed her coat. Stay here. If I'm not back in 10 minutes. Call someone. Emma scowled. Call who? The police? They're half the problem. Rebecca didn't have an answer. She just knew she had to go. A dangerous meeting, the whistleblower? The underground parking garage was dimly lit, the air thick with oil and exhaust fumes. Rebecca stepped cautiously toward a shadowy figure leaning against a concrete pillar. He was wearing a baseball cap low over his face, his hands stuffed into his pockets. Judge Carter? The man murmured, his voice low. Rebecca nodded. Who are you? Doesn't matter, he muttered. What matters is, you're walking into something bigger than you realize. Rebecca's heart pounded. How big? The man let out a bitter chuckle. Big enough that people are disappearing. Big enough that if you don't play this carefully, you'll be next. She swallowed hard. Who's behind it? The man hesitated, glancing around as if expecting someone to appear from the shadows. Then, in a near whisper, he said, the cops. Rebecca stiffened. The man continued, voice urgent. Not all of them. But the ones who made this case happen? They needed a fall guy. That robbery? It wasn't about money. It was about sending a message. The store owner, he was working with them. Something went wrong that night. Someone stole something they weren't supposed to. And now? They need to pin it on someone. Rebecca's blood ran cold. And Daniel Harris was convenient. The man nodded grimly. The perfect scapegoat. No priors, no connections, no resources to fight back. Just a black man in the wrong place at the wrong time. Rebecca's mind was racing. What was stolen? The man exhaled, his eyes darting around again. I don't know the whole story. But I know this, whatever it was, people are willing to kill to keep it buried. Rebecca's skin prickled. Then the man stepped back. I shouldn't be talking to you. If they know I'm here. A sudden screech of tires echoed through the garage. Rebecca's instincts kicked in. Run, she hissed. The man bolted into the darkness just as a black SUV skidded around the corner. Rebecca spun on her heel and sprinted toward the exit. Footsteps pounded behind her, fast and heavy. She dove behind a parked car just as the sharp crack of a gunshot shattered the air. Her heart slammed against her ribs. They were trying to silence her. She stayed low, creeping toward a side exit. The SUV peeled away, tires screeching, but she knew this wasn't over. She had just become a target. Back in the courtroom, a war begins. By the time Rebecca stormed back into the courthouse, her pulse was still hammering. Emma's eyes widened when she saw her. What the hell happened? Emma demanded. Rebecca didn't answer. She marched straight to the courtroom, slamming the door behind her. Daniel was already seated at the defense table. He raised an eyebrow at her disheveled appearance but said nothing. Rebecca took her place at the bench. She gripped her gavel tightly. If what the whistleblower said was true, this case wasn't just about Daniel anymore. It was about corruption. About a system rigged against men like him. And now, it was about survival. Rebecca tapped her gavel. Court is back in session, she said, her voice cold and commanding. She met Powell's gaze, and for the first time, he looked nervous. Good. Because whatever game they were playing, she was about to flip the board. The courtroom felt different now. Judge Rebecca Carter had returned from the near assassination attempt, her heart still pounding, her mind racing. Someone wanted her dead. Not just Daniel Harris silenced her. She gripped the gavel in her hand, meeting Prosecutor Richard Powell's gaze across the room. For the first time, she saw fear in his eyes. He knew. He knew she had figured it out. The case was no longer just about a robbery, it was about corruption, a cover-up, and a system designed to crush the innocent. Rebecca glanced at Daniel Harris, sitting at the defense table, his hands clasped together. He had no idea that the judge overseeing his case had just run for her life. She cleared her throat, slamming the gavel down. Court is back in session. A key witness returns, and the truth breaks open. Emma Blake, the sharp-witted defense attorney, stood up, eyes blazing. Your Honor, the defense would like to recall Officer Jack Travis to the stand for further questioning. A ripple of murmurs ran through the courtroom. Officer Travis, the man who arrested Daniel, had already been exposed as a liar. Now, Emma wanted to tear him apart. Travis took the stand, his jaw tight, his hands clenched. He knew he was in trouble. Emma approached him, her voice calm but cutting. "Officer Travis, let's talk about the missing red hoodie. The one you never recovered. You still claim Daniel Harris was wearing it that night, correct?" Travis swallowed. "That's right." Emma nodded, flipping through her notes. "And you also claim that Daniel ran from the crime scene." Travis hesitated. "Yes." Emma raised an eyebrow. "Funny, because a new witness has come forward." The doors to the courtroom swung open. The gas station attendant who had disappeared was standing there. "Alive!" The crowd gasped. Rebecca's breath hitched. The missing witness, he was supposed to be gone. But now, here he was. Powell paled. Emma turned to the jury. "This man has information that will change everything." The bailiff swore in the new witness, a nervous-looking man in his 40s. Emma wasted no time. "Sir, tell the court what you saw that night." The man took a deep breath. "I was working late at the gas station near the convenience store. I saw someone run out of that store. But it wasn't this man." He pointed directly at Daniel. Gasps filled the room. Powell stood. "Objection. This witness." Rebecca slammed the gavel. "Overruled. Let him speak." Emma nodded to the witness. "Go on." The man swallowed. "I saw a guy run out wearing a red hoodie, but he was taller and heavily built. Not Daniel Harris. And a few minutes later, I saw a police car pull up." Emma's eyes darkened. "Which officer was in that police car?" The man hesitated, then pointed at Officer Jack Travis. The room erupted into chaos. Rebecca's stomach dropped. Travis had been at the scene before the robbery even happened. The entire case was rigged. A confession under pressure. The whole thing was a setup. Powell leapt from his chair. "Your Honor, I move to." Emma cut him off. "Officer Travis, did you frame Daniel Harris?" Travis's face went red. "I." Emma slammed her hands on the witness stand. "Did you frame him?" Silence. Then, the unthinkable happened. Travis exhaled sharply. And his shoulders slumped. I was told to arrest him," he muttered. The courtroom exploded in chaos. Reporters scrambled to take notes. People shouted. The jury gasped. Rebecca felt her chest tighten. This was it. This was the moment the whole thing came crumbling down. Emma pounced. "Who told you to arrest him?" Travis looked straight at Prosecutor Richard Powell. Dead silence. Powell froze. His face strained of color. Emma turned to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we have here is not just a case of wrongful arrest. This is a case of police corruption, planted evidence, and a prosecution that knowingly went along with it." Powell stumbled back. That's..." Rebecca banged the gavel. "Order. Order in the court." But she knew. The whole damn case was a lie. The jury makes its decision. After everything that had happened, the jury only deliberated for 20 minutes. The foreman stood, holding the verdict slip and shaking hands. "In the case of the state of Louisiana v. Daniel Harris." A pause. Rebecca's fingers tightened around her gavel. "We find the defendant not guilty." The courtroom erupted. Daniel exhaled sharply, his entire body sagging with relief. His hands trembled against the table as if he couldn't quite believe it. Rebecca banged her gavel. "Order." But even she felt a rush of emotion. Daniel was free. The final blow, a sudden arrest. Just as the courtroom settled, Emma stood again. "Your Honor, the defense moves to have Prosecutor Richard Powell and Officer Jack Travis placed under investigation for misconduct and evidence tampering." The entire room froze. Rebecca nodded slowly. Motion granted. Suddenly, the bailiff stepped forward. "Judge Carter, we just received an arrest warrant for Prosecutor Powell." Powell's head snapped up. "What?" He choked. "You can." Two officers grabbed his arms. "You have the right to remain silent," one officer recited. The irony of it. Powell, the man who had tried to bury Daniel Harris alive in the system, was now being dragged out of the courtroom in handcuffs. Rebecca watched him go, her heart pounding. This wasn't just justice. This was retribution. The aftermath, what comes next? That evening, Rebecca found Daniel outside the courthouse. He was quiet, staring at the world as if he wasn't sure he belonged in it anymore. She approached him. "You're free." Daniel let out a breathless laugh. "Yeah. Feels weird." She hesitated. "Daniel, You don't have to say it," he interrupted. "I know." Rebecca looked at him, seeing not just the man, but the boy he used to be. The one she had left behind. She nodded. Then, what's next for you? Daniel smirked. Well, I'm getting the hell out of Louisiana. And maybe. He paused. Maybe I'll start fighting for guys like me. The ones who don't have a judge who actually cares. Rebecca smiled softly. That sounds like justice. Daniel exhaled. Maybe. And with that, he walked away. The city was still buzzing from the explosive trial. News outlets were running headlines like, "Prosecutor arrested in courtroom scandal. Wrongfully accused man freed, corruption uncovered. Judge Carter's court exposes a system rigged against justice." But Judge Rebecca Carter knew better than to celebrate. Justice wasn't the end of the road. It was the beginning of a war. She had spent years inside the system, believing in the power of law, in the rules that were meant to protect people. But now, she had proof that the system could be twisted, manipulated, and weaponized against the innocent. And she had just made enemies of the people who had built their power on that corruption. She was about to find out just how dangerous those enemies could be. A threat in the dark. It started with a phone call. Rebecca was in her office late that night, long after the courthouse had emptied. She was reviewing new cases, but her mind kept drifting to the trial that had nearly cost Daniel Harris his life. Her phone rang. Unknown caller. She frowned. Answered. At first, there was only silence. Then, a low, distorted voice. "You should have let him rot in prison." Rebecca's blood ran cold. She sat up straighter. "Who is this?" A chilling chuckle. "You think you exposed the whole truth? You think this is over?" She gripped the phone tighter. "You threatened me in a courthouse parking lot. You tried to have me killed. And now, you're calling me? You're sloppy." A pause. Then, the voice spoke again, slower this time. "That wasn't us." Rebecca's breath hitched. "What?" The voice continued, each word sharp and deliberate. "We don't make messy threats. We don't shoot at judges in parking lots. But someone does. And they're not done with you." The call cut off. Rebecca's hands trembled as she set the phone down. This wasn't just about the trial anymore. There were more players in this game. Daniel goes missing. The next morning, Rebecca woke up to another call, this time, from Emma Blake. "Rebecca," Emma's voice was sharp. "We have a problem." Rebecca's stomach tightened. "What is it?" "It's Daniel." Rebecca's heart stopped. Emma took a shaky breath. "He's missing." Rebecca shot out of bed. "What do you mean missing? I was supposed to meet him for breakfast to go over a civil suit against the city. He never showed up. His phone's off. His apartment? Ransacked." Rebecca snatched her coat and car keys. "Meet me there." The apartment, a warning left behind. When Rebecca arrived at Daniel's apartment, her blood went cold. The door was hanging open, the lock smashed. Inside, the place was a disaster. Furniture overturned. Papers scattered. Broken glass. And on the wall, in thick red spray paint. "This is not over." Emma clenched her fists. "Who the hell?" Rebecca turned to the police officer on the scene. "Any signs of struggle?" The officer shook his head. "No blood. No signs that he was forced out. But his car is still here, and his phone is on the counter. Whoever took him, they didn't want him calling for help." Rebecca's mind raced. Whoever had tried to frame Daniel before had lost the case. They had lost in court. Their prosecutor had been arrested. So why take Daniel now? Unless the real people behind this were never in the courtroom at all. She turned to Emma. This wasn't retaliation for the trial. Emma's expression darkened. "Then what the hell is it?" Rebecca's voice was like steel. "It's about whatever was stolen that night. A cryptic message, the key to the conspiracy." Rebecca sat in her car outside Daniel's apartment, mind racing. Someone had taken him. But why? Her phone buzzed. A text message. Unknown number. "If you want to save him, find out what Powell was hiding." Rebecca's pulse pounded. Powell. The disgraced prosecutor was currently sitting in a jail cell. He had tried to bury Daniel under a false case. He had worked with a corrupt officer. But even he had looked shocked when the police arrested him. Because someone bigger than him was pulling the strings. Rebecca dialed a number. Sheriff Marcus Ray, one of the few cops she still trusted. "Sheriff," she said when he picked up. "I need to visit a prisoner." The jailhouse interrogation, Powell's fear. Powell sat across from Rebecca in an interrogation room, wearing an orange jumpsuit, his once slicked back hair now disheveled. He scoffed. "Come to gloat?" Rebecca's stare was ice. "No. I came because Daniel Harris is missing." Powell flinched. He hadn't expected that. Rebecca leaned in. "I know you were just a pawn in this. But you still know more than you're saying. And if you want any chance of making a deal, you better start talking." Powell hesitated. Then, finally, he sighed. There was something in that store, he muttered. Rebecca frowned. Something stolen? Powell nodded. Something that didn't belong there. Something that wasn't supposed to be found. Rebecca's mind reeled. Drugs? Powell shook his head. No. Worse. Rebecca's stomach dropped. What was it? She demanded. Powell's hands clenched. You don't get it. I don't know. I was just told to bury the case. But the people behind this? His voice lowered. They don't care about courts, or judges, or trials. You think I was dangerous? His haunted eyes met hers. You haven't met the real monsters yet. Rebecca's breath caught. And then Powell said something that made her blood turn to ice. If they have Daniel, he won't be alive for long. A race against time, the clock is ticking. Rebecca stormed out of the jailhouse, Emma right behind her. Emma's voice was tight. So, what now? Rebecca clenched her jaw. Now? She turned to Emma. We find Daniel. And we burn these bastards to the ground. The countdown had begun. Daniel Harris was missing. Rebecca Carter knew she had little time to find him, before the people who took him decided he was no longer useful. But now, she finally understood the game she was playing. This wasn't just about a wrongful conviction anymore. This was about something bigger, darker, more dangerous. And whoever was behind it had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. They came for Daniel. Now, Rebecca was coming for them. The breakthrough, what was stolen at night. Rebecca sat in her car, phone pressed to her ear, speaking in hushed tones. Sheriff Marcus Ray had been digging. And he had found something. You were right, he said grimly. That convenience store? It wasn't just a store. Rebecca tightened her grip on the wheel. Tell me. Ray exhaled. It was a drop point. For government files. Classified information being sold to the highest bidder. Rebecca's breath caught. This wasn't about drugs. It was about secrets. And now, Daniel was caught in the crossfire. What kind of files? She demanded. Ray hesitated. I don't know exactly. But whatever it was, someone was willing to kill to keep it buried. Rebecca's pulse pounded. And you think Daniel has it? Maybe, Ray admitted. Or maybe they just think he does. Either way. If you don't find him soon, it won't matter. Rebecca clenched her jaw. She wasn't going to let that happen. Who owns the store? She asked. Ray hesitated. Then, a guy named Vincent LaSalle. Businessman on the surface. But off the record? He's connected. Real connected. Rebecca's stomach twisted. She knew that name. Vincent LaSalle wasn't just a businessman. He was a fixer. A man who made problems disappear. And right now, he had Daniel. The final confrontation, the warehouse of no return. A storm was rolling in. Rebecca and Emma pulled up to a deserted warehouse on the outskirts of town. Sheriff Ray was right behind them, his gun drawn. Rebecca's hands were steady as she stepped out of the car. She wasn't a cop. She wasn't armed. But she had something more powerful. The truth. And she was about to use it like a weapon. The warehouse loomed dark and silent. Too silent. Emma whispered, Are we really doing this? Rebecca didn't look away from the door. We don't have a choice. They moved in. Inside, the air was thick with oil and dust. A single overhead light flickered. And in the center of the room, tied to a chair, was Daniel. His face was bruised, but he was breathing. Alive. Relief flooded Rebecca for half a second, before a slow clap echoed from the shadows. Vincent LaSalle stepped into the light, a cruel smile on his face. You just don't know when to stop, do you, Judge Carter? The truth is a bullet. Rebecca stepped forward, unafraid. You set him up, she said coldly. You framed him. And now, what? You kill him to cover your tracks? LaSalle smirked. Oh, please. Harris here? He was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. He tilted his head. But you? You're a real problem. Rebecca held her ground. You're going down, LaSalle. LaSalle just chuckled. You still think this is about the law? He pulled out a silenced pistol and aimed it. Not at Daniel. At Rebecca. I could kill you right now, he murmured. And no one would ask questions. A chill ran down Rebecca's spine. This wasn't a threat. It was a promise. And then, bang. A single gunshot shattered the silence. LaSalle's body jerked, before he crumpled to the ground. Rebecca's breath hitched. Behind him, Sheriff Ray stood, his gun smoking. You were right, Judge, Ray muttered. This bastard was a problem. LaSalle lay still. Dead. Rebecca exhaled. It was over. The aftermath, a new beginning. Daniel was safe. The police raided the warehouse, uncovering files, evidence of corruption that would take down half the people who had tried to bury him. Powell flipped on his higher-ups. Travis took a plea deal. And Rebecca? She stood before the media the next day, facing flashing cameras, knowing she had just shattered the illusion of justice in her city. This trial exposed more than a wrongful conviction, she told the reporters. It exposed a system designed to fail people like Daniel Harris. She met Daniel's gaze in the crowd. "I'm not finished fighting," she promised. Not by a long shot. The battle was won. But the war for justice had only just begun. Lessons from the story: justice, corruption, and the power of truth. The story of Judge Rebecca Carter and Daniel Harris isn't just a thrilling courtroom drama, it reflects real issues in today's society. Wrongful convictions, systemic corruption, and the abuse of power aren't just fictional plot points, they happen every day in America. So what can we learn from this? The justice system isn't always just. Laws are meant to protect us, but they can be twisted by those in power. If we don't hold the system accountable, innocent people, like Daniel, can lose everything. Corruption thrives in silence. Evil doesn't win because it's stronger, it wins because people don't speak up. Rebecca risked everything to uncover the truth. We need more people willing to stand against injustice, even when it's dangerous. One person can make a difference. Rebecca didn't have a gun or an army, she had courage, persistence, and the truth. It only takes one person to start a movement, to question the system, to demand better. Stay aware, stay informed. Corruption doesn't just exist in courts, it's in politics, corporations, and law enforcement. Ask questions. Dig deeper. Don't believe everything at face value. At the end of the day, justice isn't automatic. It's a fight. The question is, are you willing to fight for it?